This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Stan, you have given up academia to go into business, and you have founded and grown multiple businesses. Tell us about your career path.
Yeah, I think my career path bounced around quite a bit early on, primarily because I had too many interests. And, I kept getting interested in different things. And when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, by that time, I'd pretty much settled into the world of biology. It just had really fascinated me. And I wound up pursuing my PhD at MIT. While I was working on my PhD, a lot of things started happening in the world of biotechnology. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. And I was just fascinated by this emerging industry and decided to do a minor in management at the Sloan School since I was at MIT anyway. And one course in particular that really fascinated me was about new technical ventures. And so the combination of that exposure, and in particular, the emphasis at Sloan on the importance of understanding something about the technology upon which your business is based, if you were going to start a technology-based business. I looked around the classroom and there were a lot of computer scientists and engineers and not a lot of biologists. And I thought this could be a pretty interesting direction to go. And then, from there, the rest is history, as they say.
Well, indeed, biology has come to the forefront with all sorts of dramatic new developments. Whether or not they end up in the human body as a regular thing is yet to be determined, of course. Where do you see bioengineering, if I could use that term loosely, going in the next 10, 20 years?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I mean, there's so much opportunity right now. It's a very, very exciting time in the field. I would say some of the major drivers are increasing ability to use information derived over the last 20 years from the Human Genome Project and everything that followed that. So just our increased knowledge about how to manipulate genomes. Part of that has led to some very exciting things happening in the world of synthetic biology. Actually, the creation of organisms or products derived from those organisms to order. Of course, the way artificial intelligence is impacting everything, the same will be true in the applications of biology and biotechnology and its use in developing new drugs and diagnostics with improved performance and personalization. So I think those are sort of some of the areas. And then one that's been in the news quite a bit recently that that is of particular interest to me has been the ability to now use some of these new technologies for engineering DNA to make organs from other organisms, such as pigs, compatible for use in transplantation in humans, where if you think about kidneys in particular, there's an enormous problem in the United States and globally with end-stage renal disease and not having access to enough organs to be able to provide transplants. So that's just sort of a little glimpse of, some of the things I find particularly exciting, but there's going to be a lot of growth.
And speaking of kidneys, you had a surprising and very dramatic experience, correct?
I did. So let's see. There's a lot of unusual aspects of the story, but in 2002, I was actually, to the credit of my primary care physician, he noticed that my serum creatinine levels have been creeping up, and and to make a long story short, after a bit of testing, it turned out that I was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease, which is a genetic disease that affects about 1 in 1,000 people in the United States, and about half of those people um, go through the rest of their lives and never have any issue, and the other half either wind up, on dialysis or worse, and, or they need an organ transplant to survive, a kidney transplant. And after about 10 years, that was the position I found myself in. So in 2011, I was very, very fortunate that a good friend and coworker offered to donate one of his kidneys. And that went extremely well. And yeah, I guess I'll stop the story there. It's more, there's more to it, but that's sort of enough for now.
Well, you had to really cope with something totally unexpected, correct?
It really came out of left field. I had, again, with no family history. So I think the likelihood of having polycystic kidney disease with a family history, is, well, let me frame it. In the general population, it's about 1 in 1,000, I said earlier. Um, but arising from what they call a spontaneous mutation, it's more like 1 in a couple of 100,000. So it's sort of like hitting the genetic lottery. It happens. And I've always told people I've been a very lucky guy. And, that luck runs both ways. um, but it's certainly been an eye-opening experience, and one, that's had a big effect on my view of the world, and certainly how I approach my life and business. And I think was actually a big driver towards writing my recent book, quite frankly. So
And tell us about that book.
yeah, so the book is, well, the book eventually evolved to become a memoir that is really focused on my career in the emerging field of DNA and genome analysis. And there's sort of a couple of underlying stories that run in parallel, because that career did involve what I'll refer to as intrapreneuring. So starting new businesses within the context of large existing businesses, and entrepreneuring. So moving out and starting or taking the lead of new businesses that were created for a specific purpose, and all in the world of, in one way or another, touching on either tools for or applications of DNA or genome analysis. Um, and yeah, and I think as I started writing the book and thinking about what I wanted to share with others, eventually a central theme really arose, and it was around the impact of unexpected events, which I refer to as, quite frankly, inevitable unexpected events, which I'll tell you why in a second, on both a life and a business. And, I think it's pretty well known, anybody who's sort of looked at the fate of technology-based ventures probably knows that roughly 90% of them do not live past 5 years. It's very risky business. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. The things that can go wrong have been cataloged, I think, very nicely in retrospect. So it's pretty easy after the fact to point to what went wrong, and then create a series of categories that you can warn people to look out for. One thing that I think is underappreciated and has become the central theme of my book is what happens when these events are completely unplanned for, hit you completely by surprise. And, and I think that's particularly challenging. And I think it's not something that's addressed sufficiently in the literature or in business school courses. And yet, when I talk to other CEOs, virtually everyone will tell me, oh, sure, over a period of 5 years, multiple times, I encountered something that we never expected and had to figure out how to respond. And And that's why I call them inevitable, because I really believe these events occur with a frequency sufficient that if you are in business for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to encounter, something that you never saw coming. Could be a challenge, could be an opportunity, but you're going to encounter it. It's inevitable. And I think aside from talking about these events and giving examples through my career of some that I ran into, really the most important take home of the book is that I believe there's a certain, I'll call it a practice, that there are um, values, skills, and approaches that, if regularly practiced, I think can enhance the likelihood that on encountering an unexpected event, you'll be able to navigate your way through to a successful outcome.
Well,
And that's sort of the key message of the book.
well, Stan, could you give us a couple of examples of things that you have analyzed?
Sure. For myself, uh, one example early on in my career, this was in the mid to late 1980s, was involved in setting up one of the first DNA diagnostic laboratories. At the time, there was a sort of standard technology that was used to analyze DNA. Um, and uh, and that was based on something called DNA probes. One day, I went to a journal club meeting of our scientific group and saw a very interesting paper presented about a new technology that it was very apparent to me would likely make our business obsolete if we couldn't find a way to get access to it. So, the emergence of a new technology and then having to figure out, is it something you can compete with? Is it something that you need access to? If you need access, how are you going to get it? There's something, you can't plan on that thing happening, and you certainly can't plan on what that thing would be. But when it hits you, you need to be able to respond in an effective way. Otherwise, you're out of business. And in this case, um, I managed to, well, I was as unsuccessful as anybody else at getting a license, but I did wind up with it. As they say, if you can't beat them, join them. And I wound up securing a job, leading the business. So there's sort of a great example of, and then taking that in the directions that I planned in the prior business. So there's one. Another dramatic example, much later in my career, we had I co-founded a business along with two partners um, in the world of transplant medicine. This is following my kidney transplant. And and basically leaving out the whole story of that, you can read the book and hear sort of more details on that story. But we reached a point where one of my co-founders and our chief scientific officer wound up developing cancer. And sadly, he passed away at a young age. We had not yet finished our product development, and we were left with, our lead scientific mind no longer available, as well as having to grapple with losing a close friend and, someone who is a real luminary in our field. So how do you get past things like that? And I think part of the way we did it, there's often some great sports analogies, but it's, the next guys have to step up. And, fortunately, our chief clinical officer, who was really led more of the sort of medical side of the business. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Turn that phone off before we started. But our chief medical officer stepped in and and wound up talking to a number of his colleagues in the field, and collectively we relied on the network we had developed among some of the key opinion leaders and leading scientists in the field, and got them to step in and basically pick up the slack and help us. And we wound up getting that product developed into market, and and it wound up being a success story. And but again, you can't plan on something like that. And very few people, I like to say there, you read contracts often, and you see these clauses about acts of God, and what should happen if there's a hurricane or an earthquake, or I've been through major earthquake, by the way, with a business too. But or a key person dies. Um, and most people, you know, they read the clauses, but those things really do happen. And if you haven't developed a practice, if you haven't essentially prepared in advance, and it's not having thought about this specific problem. It's about things like continually developing relationships in a completely non-directed way, because you don't know what network you might need access to, what kind of expertise you might need. You never know who you might need to call on for assistance. So relationships critical, continually accumulating resources, even when you think, your plan says you have enough money. I can give you stories there about, being in a bind because there wasn't enough money because, you know, things changed in the outside world. And then I think, another one, these are just three examples. There's more that I talk about, but options, I think, sort of always thinking about options. So I think it's very, very important, especially in a startup, in any early stage company, almost any business. It's really important to be mission focused. But you need to have in the back of your mind some ideas as to, how would I approach this mission in a different way if the way I'm planning on it isn't working, or, if the mission becomes irrelevant for some reason, is there some way I might pivot to something else and still create a successful scenario here? Um, so those are the types of things.
It sounds like as a company founder, one of the things one ought to do is put a big if sign above your door, reminding you to be ready if something happens.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for preparation. It's the famous Louis Pasteur quote about chance favoring the prepared mind. Um, and I really believe in that. And I also believe that adaptability is sort of the combination of um, commitment, persistence, resilience, just inherent drive. Um, all these things enable you to get through these difficult times and achieve your goals. And that's actually part of the reason I chose the name of the book, Can't Tame a Mongoose, which, I'm going to guess that virtually no one will know what that
Well, no,
means.
I was wondering if you had some mongoose, is that the plural, wandering around your home there.
Yeah, no, I don't, fortunately. Um, but I did live in the Caribbean for a number of years. And there is a West Indian saying, can't tame a mongoose. And it actually has a couple different meanings that are context dependent. Um, but the context that I'm choosing here is in a very positive sense about there are certain people that just cannot be stopped. And that combination of drive and creativity and open-mindedness and resilience and persistence, one way or another, just like the mongoose is going to get the snake or the rodent they're going after, you're going to achieve your goal.
Stan, do you have a website where people can get more information about you and what you're doing?
I do. It's at Rose Ventures, all one word, so ROSEVENTURES.net, NET.
And what would you like to add that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
Well, there's lots of things I could add, but we won't have time for all that. But but I think the most important thing, um, again, is this notion of developing a practice, um, being aware that we live in a very complex world, and businesses are no different. And in spite of smart people, with a lot of domain knowledge, backed by investors who have vetted the opportunities, a very large percentage of businesses don't succeed. And I think a key reason, again, is the impact or the inability of leaders and their teams to adequately address some of these inevitable unexpected events. And so I would just caution that, in approaching a new business, one needs to just have a strong appreciation for things we don't yet know or understand or expect.
You've been listening to the Bizgnus Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@bizgnus.com. That's BIZGNUS.com. Thanks for listening.